Thank you so much. All right, so I am so thrilled and happy to introduce a friend that I got introduced to through Soul Search this year. Soul Search is a new online platform to connect spiritual seekers with spiritual practitioners. And I know Tangela, the founder, is actually going to be speaking here this afternoon. So through that, we met Scott Catamas. And Scott is a visionary. He is definitely in the embodiment of heaven on earth, working on all of these practices and bringing his many years of coaching in relationships to all of us as we navigate these times and how we show up for each other. I know he's been a producer for many, many years, and he's also, through the pandemic, created an online show. It's currently called The Awakening World, where they meet, or he and his community meets, every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The service and generosity of this man, giving opportunities for people to rise and to be supported in these energies. I mean, I just feel it so deeply in my heart, like what he's doing to support humanity. And he also just held his first retreat for the Global Peace Tribe here in Sedona a few weeks ago. And we've all been here for weeks now, just supporting all these incredible events that are happening during all of these astrological events. So Nicole and I are just so grateful to have Scott Catamas here. And I know he's going to tell you a little bit more about himself. But come on up, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetheart. I'm here to make life more wonderful for each and every one of you today. Who's up for that? All right. And we're going to do it by talking about the hard stuff. Now, we all are in ascension. We're all going through our spiritual thing. But who here, be honest, by raise of hands, who's noticed that no matter how spiritual you are, how in tune you are with life, there are certain people that trigger you and you go from to a raging reptile. Who can, right? Well, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how to manage our triggers, because that's about the hardest thing in life for most of us, is those people or those situations that really trigger us. And so I'm going to give you some tools and some practices. But before you do that, I want to give you a little bit of a biology lesson. When your father's sperm successfully fertilized your mother's egg, where's Scott going with this? The very first thing that's formed is what becomes the reptile brain. Our entire body is built around what, by the time we're an adult, is about the size of a walnut in the back part of our head. So that's the first thing that happens, and then the brain stem and the body is built around it. So it is the oldest part of our body. Even more importantly, from an anthropological standpoint, it's ancient. Our reptile brain is not very different from what the dinosaurs had. And it's not a bad thing. It's there for one purpose. Who wants to guess what the purpose is? Stay alive, exactly. Survival. Which is good, because it kept our ancestors alive long enough to procreate, and we all get to be here. However, there's a really big difference between our culture and our time and the time of our ancestors, maybe as recent as your parents. And that is that we are no longer living in survival. We're not in survival. I mean, probably every one of us has had maybe an occasional experience where we were in physical survival, but we're not in constant survival like our ancestors were. See, the reptile brain, what it does is the moment it perceives the possibility of attack, now this is important, not attack itself, the possibility of attack, it triggers, synapses go off, and we have 4 options. We could choose fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fawn, the street language for it would be ass-kissing, people-pleasing. Fawn, when a small dog, like mine, and a big dog comes up, the small dog will get on its back and expose its neck. That's fawning. It's like, okay, I give up. You win. So those are our only options: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And none of those are good options for healthy relationship, right? So that was useful when our ancestors were in constant survival. But for us, our reptile brain can get triggered as easily as when you're trying to say something important to someone and they go, just that will trigger the reptile brain. I see somebody that recognizes that. Or you're talking to somebody that's important and they look at their cell phone. Yeah, right. Reptile brain goes off because we're telling ourselves the story. He's not listening. Is he listening? Yeah, he's listening. Okay, good. But that's what happens. Now, here's the most interesting thing. Biologists and the people who study these things have shown or have concluded 98% of the time that our reptile brain is being triggered, it's by our own thoughts. It's not by anything that's happening in the external world. It's by our own thoughts. I'm a relationship coach, as Krista mentioned, and I've worked with thousands, literally thousands of couples, families, small businesses. I've studied with Tony Robbins very deeply. My mentor was a man named Marshall Rosenberg, who founded Nonviolent Communication. So I've been very blessed. Look, I'm 66. I've been around the block. And I've had an opportunity to study with really many of the great relationship coaches and teachers. And what I'm going to try and give you in my 20 minutes that I have left is a consolidated way of how to manage our triggers, okay? And so that's why I'm giving you a little bit about the reptile brain. Now, here's the good news. We are moving from survival to thriving. And we're actually doing that as a species. The Dalai Lama allowed brain researchers to hook up electrodes to his brain, and they tracked how his brain functions. And they had like the monitors and saw what was going on. And they ran research with him for about 90 minutes. At all times, his synapses were entirely firing in the frontal lobe or the temporal lobe. Now, the frontal lobe is where the empathy center of the brain is, and it's also where the observer part of the brain is. So that's where we can see the big picture and have compassion, have empathy. Towards the end of their research, they showed him photographs of Chinese soldiers burning down a Tibetan temple to see what his response would be. And as he looked at these photographs, he wept. He didn't stuff his emotions, he wept. Synapses continued to fire up here, not back here. The lead researcher decided to really test him and said, come on, I want to know, how do you really feel when you know that Chinese soldiers are raping Tibetan women, murdering Tibetan people? How do you feel? What are you really thinking? And the Dalai Lama was very quiet. There's more tears. And then finally he said, it reminds me that I must pray equally for the Chinese as I do for the Tibetan people. Wow. Yeah. That's where we're going. That's the movement of the human species. And so that's why I love when I have a short period of time and there's only a little bit this is like the most important thing, because if we can learn how to manage our reptile brain and how to move from reptile brain into frontal lobe consciousness, life gets much better. And I want to thank Marshall Rosenberg, who taught me this. And honestly, I have a pretty wonderful life because I'm pretty rarely in reptile brain. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have judgmental thoughts. I do all the time. But now I notice them. Up, there I go again. Up, there I go again. And I don't stay there. I don't keep running it, right? So, and we all get into certain grooves. You know, we've all had certain things that have hurt us, and the pain is real. And then we replay that memory or that thought, or we think about that experience over and over and over, and that just keeps triggering our reptile brain. So, let's get to a practice. I'd like for each of you to think of a painful thought you've been running recently. You're not going to share it with anybody. You're going to keep this just inside your own consciousness. So go ahead and choose whatever the most painful thought you've been running. It can be about another person. He doesn't love me. She doesn't respect me. Or it can be about yourself. I'm not smart enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not happy enough, whatever it might be. So pick one thought. When you've picked it, close your eyes and run that thought through your brain between 5 and 10 times. And allow yourself to feel the discomfort of the thought. Running it over and over. And notice if there are any places in your body that begin to contract or begin to react to that painful thought. Okay, so you can open your eyes back up. Thank you very much. Let's clear the space a little bit. I know there was a lot. There might even been some tears for some of you. Just by raise of hands, who noticed at least one place in their body where there was a reaction? Yeah, we're very somatic, especially with those things. Okay, now, we're going to run that thought again, but this time, you're going to add the words, I'm telling myself the story that, and then whatever the painful thought is. I'm telling myself the story that I'm not enough. I'm telling myself the story that she doesn't really love me. I'm telling myself the story that he doesn't respect me. Okay, everybody clear? So let's close our eyes again, run, I'm telling myself the story that, and then the painful thought, and do that 5 to 10 times. And again, notice, is your body responding differently this time? Is your relationship to that thought different than the first time? And just do an inventory of yourself. And then when you're ready, opening our eyes and coming back into the room. Just by raise of hands, who noticed a difference? And who noticed a difference in their body? Yeah. And if you didn't notice a difference, by the way, I've given this little practice literally to thousands of people. And usually about 10 to 15% of the people don't notice a difference. So if you're in that 10 to 15%, there's nothing wrong with you. Keep trying it with different thoughts, okay? But usually 85 to 90% of the people do notice a difference. Who'd be willing to share the difference that they experienced? Anybody willing to share? Yes.
I felt freedom. In a second, I just felt my body, I was in complete freedom because it was a story I wasn't invited to.
Beautiful. Thank you. Give her a hand. Thank you. The first person to speak is always appreciated. Oh, good. Someone's going to interact.
Can you repeat it into the mic what she said so that the live stream?
She felt free. She felt free. It it lifted. Yeah. And was there a difference in your body?
Yeah, like it was a literal freedom feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Liberation.
Yeah, totally.
Beautiful. Who else would like to share? Lisa.
I noticed that I can move into the observer and then became neutral, thought without an attached emotion to it.
Beautiful. She went into observer, so she detached from the emotional part to it, the relationship to it. Yes?
I just noticed that, like, instantly, I shifted into, like, my integrated self, into all the parts that I've healed, that, like, I instantly was there with them, versus being, like, that hurt little kid.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, child, oh, adult.
Beautiful. I love that. From child to adult. really being able to shift. Yes, Jason.
I think because of your lovely setup talking about the Dalai Lama, when I went through that, I experienced the frontal lobe of saying those words and being like, well, you've been silly when you say that. Like laughter and delight is like, oh, you silly little me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Since you brought up the Dalai Lama and that, my good friend Jonathan Robinson, who has been on the show several times, interviewed the Dalai Lama. And he asked the Dalai Lama very seriously, what's the one thing that could change the world? And the Dalai Lama says, I have your answer, but you must close your eyes and I'll be right back. So Jonathan closes his eyes and waits and he waits and he waits. About 2 minutes goes by and he can feel the Dalai Lama gets up, goes away, and then the Dalai Lama comes back, sits back in front of him. And the Dalai Lama says, okay, now you can open your eyes. And Jonathan opens his eyes, and the Dalai Lama is wearing one of those silly plastic glasses with the Groucho mustache and the thing. And that's exactly what happened. Jonathan laughed, and Dalai Lama said, that's your answer. The world needs more laughter. The world needs more laughter. So you inspired me to share that story. So congratulations, those of you that had a different experience, and almost all of you did, you moved from reptile brain reactivity to frontal lobe consciousness, the movement of our species. And that's our job. Now, that doesn't mean we aren't going to feel pain. Remember, the Dalai Lama cried when he looked at those photographs. Our issues, and again, I've coached thousands of couples. The problem that causes pain or the toxicity in a relationship is not because of the differences. Differences are inevitable, no matter how much you love somebody. I mean, Krista and Nicole did a wonderful job of talking about how they manage the differences, right? The more time you spend somebody, the more differences are going to happen. It's how we manage those differences and the interpretations that we make. Remember, 98% of our reptile brain reactions are to our own thoughts, our own interpretations. So I have a commandment for you. Thou shalt not react to an interpretation of another person. Thou shalt not react to an interpretation of another person. And I say that with so much love because I spend so much time listening to people that are in tremendous pain because they're reacting to an interpretation or a projection. And even if it's your husband or your wife, any thought we ever have about another person is always a projection. It may or may not be accurate. So live in that curiosity. And that's where I learned to say, instead of, you make me so angry, you are doing blah, 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 it's like, wow, I'm noticing that I'm feeling angry. And I'm wondering if you meant such and such by saying that. I'm wondering what's really going on with you right now, because I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling nervous. And we own our vulnerability. Again, kind of like Krista and Nicole were just talking about. Instead of starting sentences with you, blah, 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 I'm feeling. This is what I'm telling myself. This is the story that I'm running. Right? And establish in our friendships and our relationships that that's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to play. We're going to own whenever we start to feel triggered, and we're going to ask, hey, what's going on? I just got scared. I just got nervous. Notice how vulnerable that is, which is then an invitation for connection, as opposed to you blah, 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 blah. Right? So slowing everything down, that's really important. We never, ever have to have a fight with somebody, but we have to learn not to escalate. We have to learn how to say, hey, let's slow down. Let's slow down. I'm getting scared. Hey, can I just hold you? My wife, who passed away 10 years ago, When I was first studying with Marshall and I was learning about nonviolent communication, and I'm a communication guy, whenever we'd get into it, I'd want to talk it through. Okay, what are you feeling? What are you needing? And finally one day she said, Scott, shut the fuck up and just hold me. Best advice. You know, if at all possible, hold first. Hold each other first, because we're mammals and we need homeostasis, right? Like looking right now with Angel and Jason. Oh. Like, have you ever had that experience too where you're in a fight but you're smart enough to hold each other? And the mind is going, but he said that, and the body's just saying, shut up, this feels really good. This is so much better. So we have to slow down, get homeostasis, get centered, and make the agreement that you will never talk about something important until both people are centered. Until both people are centered. And here's a little litmus test to know whether or not you're centered. Can you authentically care as much about what the other person is thinking or feeling as your own desire to express yourself? Another way of looking at it is, are you willing, are you as capable of really taking in what they have to say as much as you have what you want to say? And if you're not there yet, and most of the time you won't be, more breath, more holding, more remembering love. More remembering love. Most of the couples that come to me, of course, are coming because they're struggling. Something has come up. And people ask, I call myself a love coach. I started the Love Coach Academy. And so people say, well, what's love coaching? The difference between love coaching and traditional therapy is a traditional therapist has been trained and spent years learning how to study what's wrong with somebody, how to evaluate and diagnose. And that's great, there's a purpose for that. I don't think there's anything wrong with anybody. If you're autistic, or if you're brilliant, or if you are missing an arm, there's nothing wrong with you. But it's a very real challenge that you're working with in this lifetime. And in love coaching, we remember love. So when couples come, I don't start with, okay, so what did he do that drove you crazy this week, right? Or what's the fight about? I start by helping them remember the love. I have them drop into an eye gaze. I ask them to remember a moment when they felt very well loved and cared for by the other. And we just do that for a while. And then, what do you love about this person? What are their virtues? And then they melt and they begin to remember the love. And it's not until they're remembering the love and that they're feeling connected that we slowly start to talk about the differences and about the hurts that need to be understood. How much time do I have left? How much? 5? Okay. So, here's another practice for you. 10 minutes. Oh, okay. Dedicate yourself, whenever there's a difference, to making sure you're both centered, remember the love or remember the friendship, and before you talk about anything, make the commitment that the intention of the conversation is to grow closer to each other by understanding each other. That the intention for the conversation is to grow closer to each other through mutual understanding, by understanding each other. That should always be our intention when we are sitting down to talk about a difference. And notice, any fight you've ever had that's been awkward is because one or both parties haven't cared about understanding the other. They just wanted to be understood themselves. You hurt me, you did this, you did that. And we've all done that 100 times, 1,000 times. But this is how we change it. We commit to compassionately understanding. I must pray equally for the Chinese as I do for my Tibetan people. I must care equally for this other person as I want them to care for me. That is leading a spiritual life. To me, it's not spiritual reading Rumi or even going to church. It's spiritual when we do exactly what I just said. I'm going to really practice seeking to understand this person with the same level that I want to be understood. That is our non-denominational spiritual practice. And if we want to change the world, we change our relationships. We do not have any say over what Vladimir Putin does. It's tragic. I wish we did. But we have tremendous and total control over how we treat each other. That's where we have power. We have power in how we talk to each other. We have power in how we treat each other. And we have power in how we treat ourselves. I teach compassionate communication. The most important form of empathy and compassion is self-empathy. Self-empathy and self-care is not selfish. You know who, the people that are selfish in the world are the people that don't have enough self-love, so they're constantly grasping to get it from somewhere else. The people that I've met that are incredibly wise and profound and loving, a lot of them are on my show that Krista talked about and that she's co-hosted. The people that I have gotten to know that are really evolved, they've learned to love themselves. They're not grasping from the outside world to get their ego fed. And here's the beautiful thing, when we love ourselves, when our cup is full, we want to give to others. Marshall taught, and I love this quote, the greatest joy in life is contributing to the well-being of others, right? And the greatest tragedy in life are the people who haven't learned that. The people who haven't learned that. So love yourself. Give yourself empathy. Notice what your self-talk is. Notice what it is. I'm going to give you one last practice. Most of us do run self-talk that is not loving. It's, again, some of those thoughts that we all run about what another person said, what another person did, how another person should be, or what I said, or God, what I did, or the way I should be, right? So here's a practice that will change your life. Make the commitment that you're going to notice it. How many times a day am I running a thought about myself or about another person that's perpetuating pain, that's triggering my reptile brain, that's perpetuating the idea of separation, right? And we all do it every day. Make the commitment to notice. And then notice it and exhale, like literally, like let's say the thought is, well, pick what's one of mine. I want to lose 10 pounds. When I look at videos and photos of myself, oh my God, look at my belly. Okay, so being very vulnerable, very real with you. So for me, it would be like, oh my God, look at that picture of me with a belly. God, I'm loving my body exactly as it is. You pick an affirmation, start with I am, because I am is the original sound of God. It is, in the English language, the closest thing to the sound of creation, Om. So I am, and then replace that thought, that negative thought, with the positive. I am loving myself exactly as I am. Or whatever it might be, that's like the flip side of your negative thought. And literally exhale the negative one and inhale the positive. And then while you're driving or whatever, just keep running I am, whatever the I am affirmation is. And what we do is we change the grooves in our brain. Because what happens is anytime we've run a particular thought 5 or more times, we're actually obsessing. And we've started a groove in the brain that's that negative thought. We want to change that negative thought, that groove, into a positive affirmation. And that's how, because the brain is a supercomputer, and that's how we program our computer in a much more positive way. So there's some practices for you. On Saturday mornings, I've recently started something called Relationship Satsang with Scott and friends. It's at 10 o'clock Pacific time, so that'll be 11 o'clock here. And I would like to invite you to check it out. It's Zoom, but it's not live streamed. It's not recorded. It's just for the people who show up. And we talk about things, and people bring up very real relationship issues or challenges, and I offer thoughts and practices and tips. I also have other love coaches that I've trained through Love Coach Academy that often come. We also sometimes have special guests, like Kristen Hoffman will come and she'll sing a song or two. Maybe we can get Larissa to do that. And so, anyway, if you want some more information about it, let me know. And best bet is let me get your email address, or if I can get email addresses from Kristen and Nicole, I'll send you information about how you can participate. And I'd love to see all of you there. Thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful lunch.